The most major event last week was an unexpected and a shocking one. Some refer to it as the Chinese betrayal of India. But before we apportion blame, let's see what had happened. After a lull, no exchange of hostilities, no gunshots exchanged for almost 5 decades, suddenly there was a clash. And even this time, the gunshots were not exchanged, but the loss of life was tragic and shocking. 20 Indian soldiers and officers lost their life in the icy desert vastness of Ladakh in the Golan Valley. The tension had been building up for a past couple of months. Indian soldiers were deployed in large numbers on our side of what we call the LAC, the line of actual control, and the Chinese before that had amassed thousands of soldiers, heavy artillery, tanks, guns on their side, and the photographs we were treated to by the social media were pictures of jet fighters, helicopters parked in Tibetan airfields. They were flying over the Ladakh airspace. Now the interesting part is this, this what we call the line of actual control is what is effectively treated as a status quo, the border between China and India. The border between China and India runs almost to 4,000 kilometers, 3,488 kilometers according to some, and some take it beyond 4,000 kilometers. It has never been accurately measured, nor is it possible to demarcate it. It is far more difficult to demarcate it because it runs through glacial moraines, through glaciers, through it goes to watersheds which are peaks, snow-capped peaks higher than 5,000 meters. There are very high altitude passes, there are swift flowing rivers, and there is this vast no man's land kind of a desert where even if you try to mark something, the harsh winds blow and the markers may not be there for long. But there has been a sort of gentleman's understanding between China and India for the past a couple of years, and in the past 6 years Mr. Modi had met the president of the China no less than 18 times, and they had arrived at a modus vivendi that there would be no sudden conflagration, no such betrayal at this border which is hot. There had been a standoff at Doklam running weeks, but which no side blinked, but they ultimately settled to withdraw and reduce the tension at the tri-junction of Bhutan, India and China. But go back to the border. What happens is that this border runs from almost the Karakoram to through Gilgit-Baltistan region to Ladakh to Uttarakhand, to Sikkim and to Arunachal Pradesh. Now the Chinese, what they do, the Chinese always put greater pressure on Ladakh for strategic reasons because it is important for them. Their most ambitious project of One Belt, One Road runs through Tibet and Aksai Chain and down to the Gwadar port in Pakistan. So for strategic reasons to control Central Asia, have the access to underbelly of Russia, to get down to Middle East and be a major actor there, to have unimpeded access to warm water is their intention. At the same time, they offer pinpricks to India even in Arunachal. They have conceded at the moment that India has sovereignty over Sikkim, but Arunachal, they occasionally keep protesting about visits of His Holiness the Dalai Lama there, or the Indian officers, serving officers, high-ranking officers in army visiting that place. They have been irritating Indians by giving stapled visas or denying visas to people from Arunachal or from Kashmir. So that is besides the point. The Indians have put up with these all pinpricks in the hope that slowly the confidence building measures would succeed and we would have a more peaceful relationship with China. So what happened suddenly on the night of 15th June has left Indians and the rest of the world puzzled. One interpretation is that the Chinese feel themselves almost in a tight corner at the moment. The world accuses them of inflicting the coronavirus from Wuhan to the rest of the world. They think that they pressurized WHO and did not allow WHO to issue warning in time for the rest of the world to protect itself. They also think that the trade war which Americans have declared or China has affected their economy in a manner, and when the Indians are offering themselves as an alternative where the American companies might shift, it may happen, it may not happen, because the Americans also believe in Make in America, America first. So it is not necessary that the American companies would move suddenly from China to India or we can accommodate them. Chinese are also worried and apprehensive about India's response to their downward aggressive expansionist thirst in South China Sea and towards Indian Ocean. Now the 10 countries in ASEAN have different relationships with China, but they somehow or other are not very happy about China claiming rights over this vast body of water, which always has been treated as international waters, where everybody has freedom of navigation. The Chinese don't look with great favor India's proximity with the United States of America. Mr. Modi refers unabashedly to Trump being his good friend. Trump has been trying to draw India into the strategic partnership, which includes Quad, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. And with US and India, they were planning joint exercises, naval exercises in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific Rim. All this seems to contain China. Now, China doesn't like this, and China has put it bluntly. Its mouthpiece, the Global Times, which articulates the views of the government, has categorically said that India should not put all its eggs in the American basket. If it thinks that it can be a party to an anti-Chinese front, it will have to pay a big price for that. And I think even about the border, the rising tension on the border all along. Now it is also, in the hindsight, seems quite clear that the trouble with Nepal in the border in Limpiadhura, in Lipu Lake, in Kalapani sector was instigated at the instance of China. So China is putting pressure all over this disputed, unsettled border on India to say that, look, if you go closer to America, if you try to build up economic relationships other than China, then you will have to pay a price. And I think the Chinese official spokesperson have more than once rudely and repeatedly said that if India should not forget that if India does something provocative, another lesson like 62 can be taught to it. So since then, the Prime Minister has made a statement that nobody intruded into our territory, none of our posts was occupied, none of our soldiers was taken prisoner. Then the question begs itself, then how is it that 20 people, 3 officers and other men, and died, and 75 got injured, and 10 people, now we are being told, had walked away, lost their way, and they have been returned by the Chinese without any harm. Now, interestingly, just a couple of days back, what was being said is that these men had been, their release had been secured after 10 stalks by high-level officers. So I think the trouble is that this blowing hot and cold in the same breath is counterproductive. It only makes government lose its credibility. It doesn't actually hurt the adversary. Now we come to the retaliatory action. How does India retaliate to whatever has happened? Now the Chinese are laying claim to the whole of Golan Valley, which they had earlier not done, and one doesn't know what they will do in Arunachal or in Uttarakhand or elsewhere. There may be exchange of fire, there may not be exchange of fire, and this fisticuffs, this brawl took place when supposedly the two sides were peacefully disengaging. So we can't trust China anymore. There is a very major trust deficit. So there are some people who are sort of spoiling for a fight. They say that China should be taught the same lesson which Modi taught to Pakistan. But Modi realizes that discretion is the better part of valor at times. China is not Pakistan. You cannot treat China, which is militarily stronger, many times larger economy than ours, technologically more independent and reliant. We can't really do to China what we did or supposedly did to Pakistan. That's one part. China has also succeeded in weaning away India's neighbors. Even in Bangladesh, due to the CAA, there was a resentment against India, but the Chinese have promised Sheikh Hasina some 1.34 billion US dollars worth of aid for infrastructural development, for relief to fight corona and so on. So I think India is going to have a problem matching the Chinese carrots in the immediate neighborhood. The Nepalese at the moment seem to have been alienated from India reasonably. But the point is, how does India retaliate? Now, we moved our naval ships into the Indian Ocean, to the Straits of Malacca, to show that we will not let Chinese drive in South China Sea go unresisted. Our Air Force chief said that Air Force is fully prepared to meet any challenge on this front. But obviously, people are not thinking of another war with China. So it has been suggested that if the Indians boycott Chinese goods, it will hurt where the Chinese would have to take a more conciliatory role. This option again is not a very viable option because 14% of our imports originate in China, and the moment people started talking of banning Chinese products, some of the patriotic Indian entrepreneurs and industrialists were quick to say that, look, we can't. In a coronavirus struck economy, we already are having a very bad slow down. If we are to revive our economy, if we have to generate employment, we have to use material which comes from China and which makes our industrial production and our exports viable. Among them are automobile industry people, among them are people who make pharmaceuticals, among them are people who deal with electronics and telecommunications and plastics and a whole lot of other infrastructure related things. The government on its own cancelled some 420 plus crore rupees worth of a contract given to a Chinese company. And also advised the BSNL not to use any Chinese equipments or ancillaries to upgrade its 4G. It also suggested and advised the private players to do the same. But I'm afraid it cannot be done overnight. We may dream of self-reliance, but that dream will take years to realize. And in the meantime, we are so dependent on the Chinese that the problem is even more acute. Before we boycott the Chinese goods, if the Chinese decide to increase the costs of their exports to India, withdraw tariffs, then I think we are in for a long drawn economic Cold War with China as well. So options are not easy, but we shall discuss how this is going to have a fallout on the rest of the world.